Thank you very much. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to share the days with four people. I haven't known Riaz for very long, but I have admired who he is and the work he does. And I think Swami Atma Priyanandaji, represents a connection to my spiritual roots with the Ramakrishna mission. And I have watched and admired Sheshadri Chariji for his candor and the courage with which he has articulated positions on controversial issues. And of course, John Dayal is also from my college, St. Stephens, and is a very sort of, how do I put it, a powerful voice on minority issues. And so I'm deeply grateful that you have all taken the trouble to be here. It always is a little disappointing when you don't have a full house, but I think it actually emphasizes the enormous importance and significance of the conversation that we hope will unfold this evening. I had felt that, beyond the cacophony of public discourse on communal harmony, which tends to be people screaming at each other and not listening to each other, that we would try and create the space to understand first a more sort of, how do I put this? I was going to say, theoretical, scriptural, textual basis for both how, the different religious traditions look at the other, and keeping in mind that the inherent dynamic that religions are not frozen in time in terms of what the scriptures may have said once upon a time. And what usually happens is that you find the different sides to an argument reaching back to scriptural authority to justify their particular perspectives and points of view and to criticize the other. So this really is, I would hope, a context for us to articulate our own understanding and our own position about our faiths, rather than a pointing fingers at other faiths and what they're doing or they're not doing, or the ways in which it is manifesting today. Because I think that tends to put up, put us into sort of a kind of defensive position where communication and dialogue ceases. To really just say that, and I will try and represent the Buddhist tradition, and we have an eloquent spokesperson for the other leg that I stand on. And this morning I did mention that the deep inspiration that Sri Ramakrishna Thakur's celebration of diversity by, in the public sphere, engaging in the different practices and traditions within the ambit of Hinduism, and then stepping out of the precincts of the temple and engaging in the practices of other traditions, and what a powerful statement and inclusive message it was. And then somebody asked me this morning from the audience and said, well, how come you moved away from your involvement with the Ramakrishna mission to Buddhism? And I said, well, it was in fact Swami Vivekananda who at one point said that, Ramakrishna is my master and the Buddha is the Ishta. And that one of the great joys of my life was that Swamiji, Swami Ranganathananji Maharaj, and His Holiness became good friends. And His Holiness visited Belur. And so it really wasn't a question of conflict but a natural evolutionary learning process where different traditions have embraced each other. So if I may request and say Swami Atma Priyananda to speak first, and then we will come back finally to Dr. Chadi. And so what is your understanding of, from the vantage point of your tradition, but you're also a scholar of the Vedanta, and sort of an overview of how Hinduism, and it's always complicated, I know, when we talk about Hinduism, because which Hinduism? Hinduism, if we accept the way of life doctrine, then it is everything and nothing. So how do you look at our own philosophical underpinnings, and how do they look at the otherness of the other, in particular those who may not be willing to embrace our particular, and I say our because of my connection with the mission itself, our particular worldview?
Thank you so much, Rajiv. My very respectful regards to the other panelists and to the audience. It's a great honor to be here, particularly when Rajiv is chairing. We have known him for several years, and how he connects with everybody, and the metallic laughter which he brings to bear upon his conversations. Sri Ramakrishna had a wonderful statement which he made about himself. He said, "I am a glutton in the spiritual field." A glutton is a person who doesn't eat because he is hungry. He eats because he wants to taste different kinds of food. And the infinitude of God is something which is vouched by every religious tradition. And even those who don't believe in God will say that there is something which is beyond our senses. You call it nature, you call it the supreme intelligence, as Einstein once said. Albert Einstein said, "My religion consists of a humble adoration of an illimitable intelligence, which our dull faculties can comprehend only the most primitive form." So you're amazed and you're wonderstruck. It is a sense of wonder which is the source of all religious as well as scientific investigation and research. The entire life is one of great wonder. When a child is born, he looks at the world in great amazement. Unfortunately, when we become educated, we lose the wonder and go after structured pieces of knowledge. The world is a great wonder, and religious people, what's their name? By which I mean people who investigate into the spiritual truths, want to understand about this world. What is the mystery of this creation? Is there a creator at all? How did the whole thing come about? Where are we coming from? Where do we go? What is the meaning of life? People who ask certain fundamental questions about themselves, analyze their experiences, and try to understand the vis-a-vis, not the traditions per se, the knowledge which we gain from the world outside. The entire life is only an interaction between the Jiva and the Jagat, the living being which we are, and the entire universe which we see around us. This interaction means I give and take. What do I give to the world? I give to the world work, I interact, and through experience, I gain knowledge. So the entire relationship between the world and me is through karma, work, and jnana, knowledge. Now, if you understand the world, investigate deeply, you will see the every dimension of what you see in this universe, even a particle of sand, even a flower. The great poet Sri Rabindranath mentioned this. He says, "Oh Lord, we are running behind time. Time is limited in our hands. Time is unlimited. You take infinite amount of time to perfect a small flower. If you take a small grain of sand, as Vivekananda once said, and investigate deep enough, you will find an infinite dimension to it. So if you agree and feel profoundly within you the infinitude of the entire cosmic existence, the mystery, you will try to look at it in amazement and try to taste it from various points of view. So a glutton in the spiritual field is a person who is a mystic, who is a true religious person, who, rather than saying celebrating, will taste the beauty of everything. You want to taste various kinds of food, and you become you have an insatiable hunger for tasting different kinds of food, not to appease your hunger, but to taste God differently in various ways. And therefore, the religious harmony that we are talking about is like the harmony of a supermarket containing varieties of food. I like this kind of food. I don't say that food has to be rejected. You take your pick. And therefore, Vivekananda once said, I wish the number of sects and number of religions multiply till every person who is born in this universe has religion and sect for himself. So that he has a path. Every human being in this world, every particle, every insect, every plant is unique. The uniqueness of existence is fundamental to science as well as spirituality. Everything is unique, and therefore everybody has a unique path for himself. And everybody rejoicingly, happily march towards this infinite reality, and realizing the inexhaustibility of this infinitude, wondering in amazement and feeling so small, so humble before the vastness of this reality, you become reduced to nothingness, as Buddha would say, or you become the infinite, as Shankara would say in Vedanta. Shunya of the individual ego and the Purna of the infinite Atman or the reality, one and the same thing, they manifest in different ways in the quest for the infinitude. And during that quest, you go on and on, you beat a retreat, take a different path, and that every person has a unique path to follow. And let us rejoice at so many people walking in different ways. And one person's path cannot be somebody else's. Everybody is unique, and we should recognize and celebrate and rejoice at this uniqueness. This is the take of Ramakrishna tradition and the Vedantic tradition, which said long ago in the Vedas, Ekam Sad Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. That infinite truth has been spoken about in its various forms and names in different religions, because when you talk, when you articulate, you have to do it only in language which is very limited.
Thank you, Swamiji. We'll come back to you in a bit. Riaz Bhai.
सबसे पहले तो इंटरनेशनल फेस्टिवल ऑफ स्पिरिचुअल इंडिया और मंजरी जी का धन्यवाद कि उन्होंने बुलाया। हालांकि वो अभी मुझे यहाँ नहीं होना था, डॉक्टर सईदा हमीद जी को आना था, लेकिन कुछ उनके प्रायर कमिटमेंट की वजह से वो नहीं आई, तो मैं आया हूँ। तो पुणे हालांकि मेरा पहला विजिट है, मैं पहली बार आया हूँ, लेकिन ऐसा आया नहीं था। लेकिन पुणे के बारे में मेरी यादें, या कह लीजिए कि जब विद्यार्थी जीवन से मैंने पढ़ा था, और इसलिए एक अलग ज़रूर मैं पुणे के बारे में अपना एक मेरे दिल में एक इमेज है। ख़ास तौर से आप देखें जब चापेकर बंधु ने जो उन शुरुआती दिनों में जब स्वतंत्रता की लड़ाई लड़ी जा रही थी, तब यहीं से थे। उसके बाद आप देखा कि ये पुणे में ही पूना पैक्ट गांधी और अंबेडकर के बीच में हुआ। तो हालांकि इससे आप बहुत कुछ लोग डिसएग्री कर सकते हैं मेरे, लेकिन जो मेरा अपना मानना है कि पूना पैक्ट के ये जो दो धाराएं थी, इसी से फिर आगे चल के भारत का एक वैचारिक निर्माण कह लीजिए। और भी लोग हैं इसमें, ऐसा नहीं, लेकिन आधुनिक भारत में दोनों की अपनी भूमिकाएं हैं और उनका योगदान है। तीसरा, क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट, जब यहीं पुणे में गांधी जी को कैद किया गया था, तो आना चाहता था, लेकिन इस बार काफ़ी दिनों के बाद देश में बहुत जगह गया, विदेशों में, लेकिन पुणे में पहली बार, और अच्छा लगा। अब जैसा हमारा टॉपिक है सेलिब्रेटिंग डाइवर्सिटी, हार्मोनी बिटवीन फेथ, तो पहले मैं एक डिस्क्लेमर दे दूं कि मेरा नाम मुसलमान का ज़रूर है, और मैं इस्लाम के मतलब जो मान्यताएं हैं, जो उनके विचार हैं, मैं उस पर बिलीव करता हूं। लेकिन कहीं से भी मैं कोई इस्लाम का या मुसलमानों का यहाँ रिप्रेजेंटेटिव नहीं हूँ, क्योंकि जब आप रिप्रेजेंटेटिव होने का या उसका नुमाइंदगी करने का दावा करते हैं, प्रॉब्लम यहीं से शुरू होता है, मेरा अपना मानना है। तो मैंने जो अपने छोटे से जीवन काल में जो अब तक बिताया है, उसमें जो मैंने सीखा है अपने बड़ों से, कुछ अध्ययन से, मैं उस पर अपनी बात रखूँगा। तो सबसे पहले हम इसकी शुरुआत ऐसे करते हैं। अच्छा, मैं अभी आपको कुछ चीज़ें बताऊंगा कि जो इस्लाम की एक्चुअल टीचिंग क्या है, और फिर उसके बाद जो प्रॉब्लम कहाँ से शुरू हुआ, दोनों पे हम लोग बात करेंगे। इस्लाम धर्म के जो प्रवर्तक प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद थे, वो उनका जीवन काल 63 साल का था, 63 ईयर्स। 40 साल के जब वो हुए तो उनको पैगंबर प्रॉफिट बनाया गया। तो जब उनको इस चीज़ का मिरेकल हुआ या जब ज्ञान हुआ पहली बार, तो उन्होंने इस बात को सबसे पहले बताया अपनी पत्नी खदीजा को। और दूसरे जो व्यक्ति थे जिनको उन्होंने इस बारे में बताया कि मुझे ऐसी मतलब एक अलग तरीके की फीलिंग आ रही है, वो एक क्रिश्चियन ईसाई पादरी थे जिनका नाम था वर्का इब्न नौफिल। तो अब आप यहीं से समझ जाइए कि उस वक्त बहुत सारे लोग थे, उनको एक क्रिश्चियन को बताने की क्या ज़रूरत थी, और उसमें एक महिला को पहले। तो ये जो लोग कहते हैं कि इस्लाम में महिला है वो पुरुष की आधी है, या दूसरे धर्मों के लिए जो इतने इनटॉलरेंट और जो उसके नाम पे ये मारा मारी चल रही है, वो कहाँ कैसे इसका मतलब कि जो हार्मनी बिटवीन फेथ है, या वो इस्लाम कहीं ना कहीं जो दूसरे धर्मों के मानने वाले लोग हैं उसका स्पेस है, वो प्रॉफिट की अपनी लाइफ से। एक तो मैं और उदाहरण दूंगा, फिर उसके बाद आगे हम लोग बढ़ेंगे। एक बहुत फेमस आप लोग सुनते होंगे कि प्रॉफिट एक रास्ते से गुजरते थे और एक बूढ़ी महिला थी, वो बार बार उनके ऊपर कूड़ा डालती थी। एक दिन उसने वो कूड़ा नहीं डाला तो प्रॉफिट को बहुत आश्चर्य हुआ। वो पहुंचे उनके पास कि भाई क्यों नहीं आज डाली, तो पता चला कि वो बीमार है, इस वजह से नहीं डाली। एक और है वाकया कि इस्लाम के शुरुआती दिनों में एक जंग हुई, एक लड़ाई हुई, जंग बदर। उस लड़ाई में एक विरोधी दल के एक आदमी, इनका नाम था सुहैल, वो पकड़े गए। वो उस वक्त इस्लाम के ख़िलाफ़ और प्रॉफिट के ख़िलाफ़ बहुत मतलब एक तरह से पॉइजनस स्पीच देना, डेरोगेटरी रिमार्क वो करते थे। जब उनको पकड़ के लाया गया तो प्रॉफिट से पूछा लोगों ने कि भाई इनकी सज़ा ये है कि इनके दांत तोड़ दिए जाए ताकि ये फिर आगे से बोले नहीं इस्लाम के आपके ख़िलाफ़ और इस्लाम। प्रॉफिट ने कहा कि नहीं, ये नहीं होना चाहिए, कि अगर मैं इस आदमी की अगर शक्ल बिगाड़ दूँ तो आने वाले समय में जब क़यामत के दिन मैं खड़ा होऊंगा तो अल्लाह मेरी शक्ल बिगाड़ देगा। तो ये एक तरह से आप देखिए कि दुश्मनों के साथ क्या व्यवहार करने का। ये तो हमने आपको कुछ प्रॉफिट की लाइफ से बताया। अब मैं थोड़ा एक एक सेंटेंस में से मैं कुरान की कुछ टीचिंग्स बताऊंगा। जैसे चैप्टर 2 जिसको सूरह अल बकर कहते हैं, उसमें आयत, जो सेंटेंस को अरबिक में आयत कहते हैं, उसमें 256 नंबर की है। उसमें कहते हैं कि ला इकराह फिद्दीन, मतलब धर्म के मानने में, दीन के मामले में ज़बरदस्ती नहीं करनी चाहिए। तो जो लोग ये ज़बरदस्ती का इस्लाम कबूल करवाते हैं वो आप बताएं कि ये कहाँ से है। अगला मैं एक और बोलूँगा, चैप्टर 5 है अल-माइदा, उसमें सेंटेंस नंबर है 32। उसमें कहा गया है कि जैसे कुरान में किया है कि जो जितने सारे क्रिएचर हैं उसमें जो इंसान है वो अशरफुल मखलूक़ात है, वो सबसे बढ़िया है, सबसे बेहतर है। तो आगे फिर उसको ये एक्सप्लेन किया जा रहा है कि अगर आप किसी एक निर्दोष का अगर आप उसका खून बहाते हैं तो ऐसा है जैसे कि आपने पूरी इंसानियत का खून बहाया, और अगर आप एक निर्दोष का अगर जीवन बचाते हैं तो इसका मतलब ये है कि आपने पूरी इंसानियत, पूरी मानवता की रक्षा की है। एक और सूरा है 109 नंबर का चैप्टर है वो, उसमें 5 नंबर की आयत है, लकुम दीनकुम वलिय दीन, तुम्हारे लिए तुम्हारा धर्म, हमारे लिए हमारा धर्म। तो ये तब हुआ कि जब मक्के में कुछ इस्लाम के भी फॉलोअर हो गए थे तब तक, और दूसरे भी, तो उनके बीच में बड़ा कंट्रोवर्सी शुरू हो गया। तब ये बताया गया कि नहीं, तुम्हारे लिए तुम्हारा, हमारे लिए हमारा। अब आखिर मैंने जो अभी आपको बताया कि ये इतनी इतनी अच्छी अच्छी बातें मैंने आपको बताई, फिर ये कंट्रोवर्सी शुरू कहाँ से हुआ, ये धर्म के नाम पे। और ये भी मैं बता दूँ, ये जो मैं अच्छाई बयान कर रहा हूँ ऐसा नहीं है, ये सारे धर्मों में है, अलग अलग तरीके से लिखा हुआ है। जैसा कि अभी स्वामी जी ने भी बताया, मैंने भी ये लिख के लाया था ऋग्वेद से कि एकम सद विप्रा बहुधा वदंती, वाइज पीपल एक्सप्लेन्स द सेम ट्रूथ इन डिफरेंट मैनर। तो अब इसमें आपने देखा एक शर्त है कि वाइज पीपल, तो वाइज पीपल एक्सप्लेन करें और वाइज पीपल समझे। तो कभी कभी क्या होता है कि बुद्धिहीन लोग भी क्या करते हैं, समझाना शुरू कर देते हैं, और बुद्धिहीन लोग फिर समझते भी हैं। मामला यहाँ से ख़राब होना शुरू होता है। अब मैं आपको अच्छा, दूसरी एक और चीज़ है कि आप अपनी सुविधा के अनुसार उसको एक्सप्लेन करना शुरू किए। जैसे मैं 3 लोगों का नाम लूँगा अभी, वो तीनों मुसलमान हैं, महमूद गजनबी, अलबरूनी और ख्वाजा मोइनुद्दीन चिश्ती। ये तीनों अपने आप को मुसलमान होने का दावा करते हैं, लेकिन महमूद गजनबी की नज़र से अगर हिंदुस्तान को देखा जाए तो कैसा हिंदुस्तान है? मूर्ति पूजने वालों का, घटिया लोगों का और जाहिलों का, जो और भी जितनी घटिया बातें आप कह सकते हैं। अगर अलबरूनी की नज़र से देखा जाए तो अलबरूनी क्या कहते हैं? उनको यहाँ की हर चीज़ में अच्छाई दिखती है। वो ये कहते हैं यहाँ के पेड़ पौधों की, यहाँ के मौसम की, यहाँ के लोगों की ईमानदारी की, यहाँ की मिट्टी की, यहाँ के वातावरण की, यहाँ के फूलों के रंगों की वो लिखते हैं। तो तीसरे जिनका मैंने नाम लिया ख्वाजा मोइनुद्दीन चिश्ती। अब मोइनुद्दीन चिश्ती की नज़र से देखिए तो अब होता क्या है कि अब जो मुसलमान होगा वो अपनी सुविधा के अनुसार इसमें किसी को अपना आइडियल मानेगा जब उसको ज़रूरत पड़ेगी। महमूद गजनबी को कोई मान लेगा, कोई अलबरूनी को मानेगा, कोई। उसी तरह से दूसरे पक्ष में भी अगर उनको इस्लाम का कोई चेहरा पेश करना हो तो वो कभी महमूद गजनबी को कहेंगे, कभी अलबरूनी को। तो ये सुविधा अनुसार जो मान्यता है वो एक, इस पे हमको ध्यान देना। एक और इम्पॉर्टेंट, जैसे शिवाजी, मैं चूँकि हिस्ट्री का स्टूडेंट हूँ इसलिए बार बार आप देखते होंगे कि मेरा कदम स्लिप करके हिस्ट्री में चला जा रहा है। शिवाजी को अक्सर ये मुसलमान विरोधी कहा जा रहा है। मैं किसी हिंदू का नाम नहीं लूँगा, एक मुसलमान हिस्टोरियन है और मुग़ल काल में है, उनका नाम है मोहम्मद हाशिम खाफ़ी खां। उन्होंने किताब लिखी मुंतखाबुल लुबाब। उसमें उन्होंने लिखा है शिवाजी के बारे में कि शिवाजी जब कभी किसी अभियान में जाते थे तो अपने लोगों को ख़ास तौर से निर्देश देते थे कि जो इसमें मुसलमानों के जो उनके धार्मिक स्थल हैं, उनकी जो भावनाएं हैं, उनका ख़ास ख्याल रखा जाए। और आगे ये भी लिखते हैं कि एक बार एक हमले में मस्जिद गिरा दी गई तो शिवाजी ने खुद जाके उसको, और जो अगर कोई धार्मिक ग्रंथ कुरान या बाकी चीज़ें होती थी वो दूसरों को, मुसलमानों को दे देते थे। तो अब देखिए शिवाजी का इमेज क्या है। उसी तरह अच्छा, दूसरी चीज़ क्या है कि आप कहीं की चीज़ कहीं लाना चाहते हैं, कॉपी पेस्ट। तो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि जो चीज़ सऊदी अरब के लिए ठीक हो या ईरान के लिए ठीक हो या मिस्र के लिए ठीक हो वह हिंदुस्तान के लिए ठीक हो। मैं आपको एक बात बताऊं कि हमारे यहाँ इंडिया में अक्सर देखते हैं, मैं अपने तरफ बिहार में, यूपी में देखता हूं कि लोग दहेज में गाय को देते हैं। इस मैं कोई दहेज प्रथा का समर्थक नहीं हूं, मैं एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इसका बता रहा हूं। तो गाय देते हैं, या किसी की तारीफ़ करनी होती है तो हम लोग कहते हैं कि ये बड़ा गाय की तरह है, शरीफ आदमी है। सऊदी अरब में वहाँ पे घोड़ा और ऊँट, उसकी बहुत ज़्यादा वहाँ पे एक तरह से डिमांड है या इज्जत है। और एक और जो जानवर है गधा, उसको वहाँ बहुत डे टू डे लाइफ में उनके बहुत काम आता है वो, और वो उनके मतलब मेहनत के लिए, सहनशीलता के लिए। तो वहाँ अगर अरब में आज भी बद्दू में अगर आप किसी को कहते हैं कि आप गधा हैं तो उसके लिए सम्मान की बात होती है। तो अब बताइए कि अगर अरब में कह दिया जाए किसी को कि आप गाय हैं और हिंदुस्तान में कह दिया जाए कि आप गधा हैं तो मामला कितना ख़राब होगा। तो मेरा यही कहना है कि जो चीज़ों को संदर्भ में, अब कहीं इस्लाम है उसमें ये मैं बताना चाहूँ कि इज्तिहाद है समय के हिसाब। अब जो 1000 साल पहले था वो आज वो ठीक नहीं हो सकता है, जो आज है हो सकता है कि 200 साल बाद वो ठीक नहीं रहेगा। तो ये मुझे कहना था, बाकी मुझे लगता है कि फिर क्वेश्चन सेशन में चूँकि टाइम के लिए। थैंक यू।
Thank you very much, Riaz Bhai, for that overview, and which we were hoping to come to, but thank you for presenting it at that time. I'd ask, I mean, this is again not to sort of flag a particular faith, but I think that the aspiration of the evening, and I have to thank you, and I have to thank Swamiji, and just sort of the flag, is to really understand. I mean, we see a certain a tenor, a certain vocabulary of in what you're saying, in your concern about how Islam is being perceived today, and which is different to a more self-confident tenor that, say, the Swamiji. So we each bring to our presentation a sense of where we feel we fit into the contemporary discourse. And my own sense is that is also to look at somewhere when we look at the aspiration is how we look at the otherness of the other, but more importantly, how we look at the hostility of the other and how we process and respond to that. Do we still turn the other cheek? As you know, in history, in sort of, as I was taught in a missionary school, but surely, as you have very eloquently pointed out, religions evolve. They're not meant to be frozen in time, and the way they're interpreted and applied. I think an important thing that you mentioned, which is really which is sort of a counter to what, not a counter, but an elaboration of what Swamiji was pointing out, that the experiential Hinduism that he is looking at is really of the monks and the illumined. Is it? This is just a question. It's not an answer. In some sections it is. Is this the sensibility of the people or the sections of society which are the breeding ground for conflict? So it is a structured, tiered environment in which we function. And it has been our experience in my work with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Swamiji in particular, and we hope in the future with Mr. Chari, is that really that when you put a group of religious leaders together, there is a great sense of bonhomie and harmony, and we all preach the same thing and we all aspire to the same thing, and it just sort of dissipates in the reality of everyday life and living. And so my sort of question, sort of a lead in to both John and to Mr. Chari, who will follow, is to both, give us a sense of the overarching view that the philosophy you quoted from the Quran and the life of the Prophet, that sort of is at the apex of the pyramid. But as we come down the pyramid, what is the reality that we need to confront? And I do want to, I have great respect and admiration for all our panelists and the audience. So this is not about hitting anybody or any particular group or what have you, but just to try and understand a sensibility, to try and understand the triggers of conflict and disharmony.
In this age of Botox, who's to define one cheek from another? But thank you very much to the organizers and to you, because I'm here partly because you commended me to the organizers. I come here as a caricature of myself in a way. Usually I go to places when I'm called as a Christian with a Bible in one hand, a pocket edition at that, and a copy of the Constitution in the other. And these are no optics. These are how one has to live in any society. In the Arabia of when the first revelation was told, or the second one to a priest, to contemporary India. Before I came here in my hotel, I was wondering, my normal dress, as Sheshadri, my old friend knows, is what he is wearing, the Nehru jacket, or whatever it is called these days. But I thought, since it's nice weather, and why not go in a tie? Because people do expect. In Bombay films, in many places, the tie, and this is a lovely one, and a jacket is how Christians come, and Muslims should have a beard. And here are a Buddhist and a Christian sporting beard, and not there. But I thought optics were of importance, and demolishing optics was of importance. Because as again I say, I am not here to defend Christ. As a practicing Catholic, who came back to the church after almost half of his life outside the church. I am confident here, seated in front of a nearly empty house, knowing that it's not I who's defending Jesus. Jesus will defend me if there is need. Otherwise, he's given me a brain and two hands to do what needs to be done. I have read, I'm not a theologian, I was trained to be a physicist, failed, and became a practicing journalist, a war correspondent, seen much bloodshed in 30 years of active war reporting. But I've read theology, I've read Vivekananda, and therefore I'm not a cherry picker. I will not just pick the bad or just the good. I look at things in entirety, and Vivekananda is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's absolutely almost the last word if read in its entirety. Because he didn't have an evil eye in his body. He saw everything, he critiqued himself, he praised others, he praised Islam, he praised everybody. Looking at others, and this is the core point, fraternity. If anything there is in the Bible, one word, the distillate, not through fine printing or microscopic printing, but the distillate of the Bible would be equality and fraternity. Equality itself has no meaning. The Constitution says we are all equal. But unless there is love for each other, and that's what Christ, I thought, made meaning of. When they asked him that Moses has said this and Abraham has said this, or we are Ahle Kitab, people of the book. He and I are people of this book. But all of us are people of this book. Well, what good is it unless there is the element of fraternity? And how does that element then come into being? How does it play out? How does it come to a situation where it comes to me in my life? My only child, not my only child of two, but my only son is married to a Hindu. Very welcome. She continues to be a beautiful Hindu girl. My brother's only child, he has just one daughter, is married to a Muslim. And we have embraced our son-in-law because my daughter is not married, so we have one son-in-law. We have embraced him. Where does that come from? My grandchild Kabir, a child of a half Brahmin, half Kayastha mother, a child of a Syrian father. My two grandnephews, Rehan and Suhan, children of a Malayali Muslim. Possibly part of him could be from Arabia. A lot of blood across the nations, across the seas, has melded and fused in all of us, really. Where does this come from? The equanimity with which you embrace the word, fraternity and love, knowing that they are different but similar. And that is the strength which gives me strength to stand up against foes known and unknown and speak on a daily basis, on the road, in classrooms, in debating societies, on television, from a position where I know that this may not be a popular point of view. I oppose the death penalty. I know it's a totally unpopular point of view at the moment. Everybody wants everybody else to hang. I take that position. Peace. No, I'm all for peace. I abjure violence in my own life, and I preach a sense of nonviolence, as Gandhi possibly taught all of us. I also know that it is so easy to critique, to condemn, to criticize. I know it from the lives of India's great saints, but how difficult it is to find some goodness in the other. That one little thing that will, the socket that he gives me to put my plug in and derive energy and give him energy, that the search for that is through what I would call, not as somebody who has done an exegesis of the Bible. The Bible has been critiqued for 2,000 years, as no other document of any religion has been. It's been critiqued by its own followers, looking for contradictions, looking for loopholes, looking for small ills. Where can I find an escape from loving each other? So there's no point in critiquing the Bible. It's been well critiqued by good experts. but in searching for goodness in the other. I think that is the essence of life. And the code word for it is the dialogue of life. I don't care does he love dogs? Does he not? I love dogs. But when I want to talk to Rajiv, and I must tell you, Rajiv Mehrotra is not a unique name. There's another Rajiv Mehrotra who has been inviting me to trap me. He's written a book against me. But that's a very different thing. But the point is, when you are in a dialogue of life, I have been in a dialogue of life with him. We have been to many seminars. The Dalai Lama himself hosted both of us. In fact, he was another reason why I was there. And it is through these dialogues of life, many ways, many places, many people, from a child to the Pope to the Holiness Mother Teresa, all the people, that you find out how easy then it is to live together. Religions also live together with the same ease if man doesn't intervene. Buddhism and Islam lived together in Afghanistan for centuries without the Bamiyan being touched. But madmen came and they demolished the Bamiyan. But the hollow now is a far more powerful Bamiyan than the statues were. Religions have found, if as a student of history, of religious history, they have lived together. There have been wars, there have been the Crusades, and yet there have been eons of peace. Damascus, Sham, areas of the region, Egypt itself show you the beauty of the coexistence of religion. Even in the midst of wars, these things were not touched. How do we carry on this dialogue of life is the challenge before us. I would hold fraternity as the glue that will bring the dialogue of life to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that very, how do I put it, a wonderful overview in sort of connecting several dots and pinning it on the idea of fraternity. Jai Sahib, you have done a lot, sort of research and investigated in sort of almost academic terms as a active politicians on the ground, the sort of the role of religion in fostering communal harmony in a space where religion is often seen as a source of communal disharmony. You've also pointed out, I think, with substantial substance, that often what is a law and order problem and are deviants from tradition, and I think we've all sort of pointed in that direction too, is then labeled as conflict, is labeled as an issue of religion. And I think the challenge is, I mean, we sit down and we talk, and like I said, religious leaders talk, and we're lost. Where do we begin? And we tend to engage with the abstract, and it is, I mean, at one level it's very concrete to talk about the fraternity of love, but how do we foster the community of love? Or as Swamiji talked about the gluttony of spirituality. So how do we come down to earth from the stratosphere of the origins of religions and the prophecies and then the teachings of the prophets and the great masters? And since you're perhaps, both in terms of your academic work, you're doing research in these areas, and within the framework of Hinduism, I'm always sort of nervous asking someone to talk about the Hindu perspective, because I think there are a million different perspectives, but the overarching idea of it.
Thank you, Rajiv. In fact, I'm glad that you are not asking me to speak about the Hindu perspective, because for two reasons. One, more than me, the rest of the four on this days can speak about the Hindu perspective much better. I'm not the person concerned. And as far as practicing politician is concerned, I don't practice.
I mean the
In
insights
fact,
from being close to the people.
In fact, I always say that by training I am an advocate, and I have a sanad which I got in 1980, and this is 2020. I have never practiced, so I always say I never practice. I only preach.
Let's hear what you preach.
So, politics I don't practice. Law I don't practice. And I mean, it would be sacrilegious to say it here. I don't know if I'm a practicing Hindu. So these are all the basic problem that you have raised very pertinently is the dichotomy between these two aspects of all teachings of these great saints being the same. Why do we have conflicts? So I think, as Voltaire said, if you want a conversation with me, let us define the terms. We tend to misunderstand and misrepresent certain terminologies. Like we always say, religious harmony. All religions are same. All religions cannot be same. All faith cannot be same. I have faith in X, you have faith in Y. X and Y are saying the same thing. But as a follower of X, I don't agree with you. How is it possible? If X and Y are the same, you and me should be speaking the same language and doing the same thing. But our faiths are different. So we confuse between religion, faith, method of worship, and then we tend to try and find some common ground on all these things. You will certainly find a common ground in all these things. But you will also find divergence. So even in Islamic theology, I'm not even a student of Islamic theology, forget expertise. But I think even when Allah Ta'ala was creating the universe, he had a critic, Iblis, right? Incidentally, there is a Marathi term, Iblis. Iblis is a person who is always a critic. Incidentally, in Islamic theology, this is how the word comes. There was one critic, he was called Iblis, and he used to always tell Allah Ta'ala that what you are doing is wrong. So finally, Allah Ta'ala said that if all that I have done is wrong, I am going to do one thing. I am going to keep a little bit of you in every person, everything that I have created. That is why they say, we as human beings, as the creation of the Creator, are always critical. So we have a Iblis in all of us. In fact, I remember what Somerset Maugham used to, in one of his short stories, he says, there is a dialogue between the philosopher and God. This philosopher is challenging God. He says, you are not all powerful. Because somebody does something wrong and you don't punish him. So God says, yes, I will punish him. So he punishes. So the philosopher says, good. So now we have proved that you are all powerful. But you are not all good. You should not have punished him. You should have pardoned him. God says, yes, that is right. So he pardons him. So then the philosopher says, look, you are all good, but you are not all powerful. So God says, the story ends as saying that when God wants to punish a philosopher, he gives him followers. So he condemns that you will go back to the world and you will have followers. So you look at any philosopher, there is nothing wrong with him. The problem is with the followers. So we have all these philosophies or what Bertrand Russell has used a very fine term. He says Western religions and Eastern thought. In East, you don't have religions, you have thought, what we call darshan. So, darshan is what you experience. As it is very famously said that we are not human beings experiencing spirituality. We are spiritual beings experiencing humanity. So we are all spiritual beings. So there have been n number of spiritual beings before us, and there will be after us also. So each one realizes certain things, because what we believe is, I think the best definition of this was given by none other than Mahatma Gandhi himself. So he says in one place, 1926, he has written in Harijan. He says Hinduism is a relentless pursuit of truth. So he was asked about it. So he says, wherever anyone pursues truth is a saint. So we are all actually pursuing the truth, the ultimate truth. And there are two ways of pursuing that ultimate truth, as Swamiji very rightly said, the neti and the iti. You say this is truth. You say everything is truth. This pen is truth, this paper is truth, we are all truth in different forms. Or we say nothing is truth, shunyavad. So this is not true, this is not true. So discard everything that is not true and try to finally realize what the truth is. So in this process, we gain lot of knowledge. So all this knowledge becomes a repository of the spiritual experiences that the great masters have experienced. Now, this has been passed on. So what happens is, religion is a very limited word. Religion cannot contain this truth in this real form. So this truth has to be contained, realized, experienced and realized. So that the collective experience of these truths at various times by various people is what humanity represents. So it is the humanity which is the repository of all this truth. So as again Mahatma Gandhi said, I have great faith in humanity, and if there are some bad elements, it doesn't mean the entire humanity is bad or wrong. It's like a few drops in the ocean may be bad, but that doesn't mean the entire ocean is bad. This is what Mahatma Gandhi said. Similarly, I think it is not the problem with humanity, but it is the problem with a few followers who suffer from identity crisis. I think I'm a Hindu, and that is my identity. And in order to prove that I have a better identity than you have, there is a conflict. So conflict starts with identity. So once we know who we are, as Swamiji very rightly pointed out in the beginning, this whole quest is, who am I? So if I think I'm a Hindu, then I will have to go into that depth. And then once I go into that depth, then I realize that as it is said in the Bible, letter killeth, spirit reviveth. So when I go by the letter, I spoil the whole show. I go to the spirit of what I am. Then I realize what it is. So the ultimate truth is the same. And this ultimate truth is what, it cannot have a name. Because if it has a name, then it is not truth. So it's a broad identity. The word that I am going to use now is what is dharma. So unfortunately, dharma is not religion. That's why I again invoke Voltaire. If you want to converse, let us define the terms. The moment we say dharma is equal to religion, I mentioned the other day also in one of the talks where you were there about the book written by Nani Palkhiwala, We the People, where he explains about the greatness of the culture and civilization. And he says, religion is civilization, dharma is culture. And he says, he uses the word dharma in all his writings, and he says, I am using dharma consciously, it is not religion. So please do not translate my word dharma into religion. It's a footnote he has given. It's a very famous book, We the People, that is the title of the book. And it starts with a wonderful sentence. He says, we are all like donkeys. This is what Palkiwala said. We are all like donkeys carrying a sack of gold. We don't know what we are carrying. So this essence is what is missing. So I think the moment we realize this essence, then probably things will change. But then that is the biggest challenge. Because the moment we realize the essence of it, the identity goes off. When there is no identity, then we all merge into one entity. So that, like they say, I am nija puroveti gananam lagu chetasam udara charitata nam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. So when we are able to say vasudhaiva kutumbakam, the entire world, universe is one family, the prerequisite of this is udara charitanam tu. You have to have a broad heart. If you don't have that kind of a broad heart, you cannot really go to that state, that stage. Once you go to that stage, there is no identity crisis and there is no conflict. So you come from the top to the bottom, or you go from the bottom to the top. The essence is in the identity crisis. And if we all are able to really go into the truth of the matter, then I think what he said about Islam, or what is said in the Bible, it all comes down to the same. So you call it, whichever way you analyze it, then you will come to the same truth. So I think that is where more of these interactions have to take place. But then again, if these interactions take place at a smaller level, it doesn't solve the problem. It has to percolate down to the follower stage. The moment it percolates down to the follower stage, then the philosopher loses his identity. That's again the problem.
I think that where I have to dare to disagree with you in a sense, because I quote you at some point saying truth and then truths. Now, the tradition that I come from currently in terms of Buddhism, I think the Buddhist idea is very clear on different truths, and there is no, we can call it essence, we can give it all these words because we can't give it a conceptual framework, but there is the notion of absolute truth, relative truths. Is there an absolute truth? The absolute truth is there is no absolute truth, and actually that's really is in a sense, the neti doctrine that you use to approach whatever that reality is. And I think that it is precisely in and this is something you said, and I agreed with you when you said it, and then you seem to contradict that, was that, when we have a sort of an interfaith dialogue, the tendency is precisely to say this. Look, we're all human beings. We want happiness. We do not want suffering, which is true. And to look at sort of commonalities in everyday experience and in everyday aspiration. But when we bring in philosophical structures or our quest for identity, and that quest for identity is really not an individual personal quest, but is a structured quest for identity prescribed by a particular faith. It's sort of like a predetermined structure within which I try and find my identity as a follower of Ramakrishna mission, or of the Dalai Lama, or of Buddhism, or what have you. It is in letting loose the moorings of identity. And so in a discourse that we were now looking at in the Buddhist tradition as an alternative, we don't know that it is one, is to really open oneself up and to say that, look, religion or practice or identity is a personal matter. And can we approach this through reason and logic as to what is fair, what is useful, what will be conducive to harmony, to coexistence, so that we can each pursue our own sense of identity. I mean, he used the word fraternity, and so we, instead of tagging it on a particular religion, respecting all religions, and then pointing out perhaps, it's sort of, and saying, look, we live in an interdependent world. And so if I am to be happy or I am to be a successful businessman or whatever, I need a certain social cohesion, social harmony. And to approach this, not necessarily piggybacking on our particular identities, but in a more inclusive manner of reason and logic. And which is where I think also the role of India's phenomenal, and I spoke about this morning, a phenomenal heritage of mind training, which doesn't necessarily piggyback on particular philosophical systems. To be able to use that to bring about transformation without the labels of particular religions. Obviously, established religions and traditions and faiths, whatever we want to label them, will tend to resist this, because religions also embody, in a sense, power and influence and the comfort of a framework which reassures you that it all adds up. And I think that in recent history, and that is why we look so much at the Ramakrishna tradition, and Ramakrishna Thakur himself, was this willingness to embrace in the public sphere different traditions, and not just embrace them syncretically, which means let's talk about them. So what Thakur was really doing when he stepped out was he was living the life and the experience of Islam. He wasn't just talking about it and saying, well, tell me what it is. So he was giving up for that period to himself the very identity of a bhakta. And then it's amazing if you look at, I mean, it is not to glorify my tradition or his, but just as an example of the engaging from the Hindu tradition in recent history. And so, what does Swami Vivekananda do when the master passes away? He meditates on the Buddha, and he models the Ramakrishna mission on the Buddhist model of the Sangha. And here he is promoting, and for want of a better word, and the cricket jargon, so he's batting on a Vedanta wicket. That comes from bhakti. So within the same institution, and I think the other genius of Vivekananda was to identify the human archetypes. So there are archetypes when you talk about a karma yogi, or you talk about jnana yogi, and is the appropriateness of different approaches to truth, brackets S, of individual mental dispositions located in different social and cultural environments. That's what he was really doing. And again, the mission embodies, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be sort of glorifying this, but it's my learning, and I'm sure there are numerous other models. So within the mission, you will find that an aspirant who's a monk, who's a karma yogi, is packed off to the Nakshal areas to run schools and colleges. The Jnana yogi sits here and teaches. And so within that, so I think the recognition that perhaps a source of conflict or dissatisfaction which manifests in social engagement is because of our own discomfort of processing or aligning with the identities that we have inherited or we have been born into. And it is not every family that has the courage to say that, okay, you can go and marry a Hindu and you can both retain your identities. And you're absolutely right. It is that unless there is a substantial, what can we do after all? And I would really submit that all we can do is to try and create an alternative substantive discourse and hope that ultimately that it will permeate in some way as sort of a conscious engagement. And sort of time runs out and I have spoken too much, but Swamiji, I just wanted to invite you for
Among the several things you spoke about, the concern, this is one point of view, because having been trained scientifically and philosophically, we always tend to talk about philosophical principles. And people usually say, Swami, you talk too much about philosophy, that's all in the air, that's the stratosphere you mentioned. But what about ground reality? Here there's a remarkable statement that Narendranath made, not Swami Vivekananda. He was a teenager. In a conversation casually he mentioned, it's recorded. He said there are two types of literature. One type which idealizes the real, the other realizes the ideal. It is the second type which stands the test of time. So I always ask myself, what is the age of a newspaper? Half hour, 1 hour? You're so restless. On 3rd of October and 27th of January, 16th of August, hey, where is the newspaper? It is not there and you feel terribly restless. You get a newspaper, you throw it after a half hour because it idealizes the real. I want to show what is exactly happening in the world. That's what the journalists do. That's what the filmmakers normally do. If you talk about philosophical, you are trying to, that is something which is ideal. You have to realize the ideal and not idealize the real. These philosophical principles have to percolate into society. And Swami Vivekananda once said, my idea of Vedantic ideal of society is that Vedantic civilization is that the highest truth should be made most practical. This is exactly what the Buddha did. It is possible. The highest ideal, the rarest of the rare ideal of the lack of I-ness with you, the ego is totally absent. The shunya, which was later on philosophized by Nagarjuna, that became the ideal of society. Hundreds of thousands of people practiced it. And if you are not there, which all religions say, cross the I, then you are in harmony. The I say, this is my religion, this is my tenet. My question is, as having been scientifically trained, the scientist doesn't say that. Einstein is happy with Niels Bohr, Niels Bohr is happy with Schrodinger. They have different scientific ideas about reality. They're completely different. But they live together because they're looking at it in amazement and trying to find out different ways of looking at it. So is it not possible for religionists to do this? An interesting story which Ramakrishna used to say, Mahadeva, Shiva, was a great devotee of Rama. And Ramachandra in turn was worshipping Shiva. Once there's a big quarrel between these two. They quickly reconciled. The monkeys, the followers of Rama, and the bhutas, the follower of Shiva, they never reconciled. The problem, as he said, when you have this why the followers don't reconcile is because if the leaders sit together and reconcile, the followers say, we have no identity. Where is our leader? And secondly, it is very easy to get up a group based on a negative ideology. Come, let us hate that fellow. 100 people will join you. Come, let us help him. Nobody will come. It's a human psychology, very difficult for people to be united based on a fundamental, positive, elevating, loving doctrine. This is what the great prophets did. You are mentioning about the Buddha and the great contribution that how the idea of egolessness itself became a great doctrine for harmony. And Buddha said, don't worship anybody, including me. And Buddha became the greatest God. And the Buddhistic religion later on said, this is the only thing and every other religion should be destroyed. How much of bloodshed has happened because of that? I am afraid Ramakrishna Mission, God forbid, should not later on say, Thakur was the only great liberal person, and the liberality of Ramakrishna Thakur, how he practiced everything, lived like a Muslim, lived like a Christian, practiced it. This kind of liberality is very unique and nobody else has it, and therefore we are separate. See how the human mind somehow wants to clinch at some uniqueness for the sake of survival of the identity which gives me what I am. So we should understand that if you let go, then you really live. The moment you dissipate your ego, then you become all. So the idea of the Purna Shunya being the equal, I personally feel the highest philosophical doctrines can be made to percolate into society. That requires the life and character of a great man. I end with one quote of Swamiji. Swamiji said, Vivekananda said, religions of the world have become lifeless mockeries. What the world now needs is character. That character which is one of boundless love, where every word will tell like thunderbolt. He said about his own religion, there is no religion on earth which talks about the glory of the human soul and the divinity in all beings, as Hinduism said. And there is no religion which tramples some of the necks of the poor and the downtrodden as much as religion in practice does. He said that is because the priestcraft, some people with vested interests want to hold on to this and create a group. I compare them with the modern software computer engineers who will say, do you know the computer language? No. Give me a hefty amount of money. I will interpret this to the computer in my language. So the religion said, you do not know God's language. You do not know Sanskrit. So I will talk to God on your behalf. Swami Vivekananda said, the entire history of religion is the conflict between the priests on the one hand and prophets on the other. That's what the Christ said. This is what the Buddha did. This is what the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. He said, directly you can approach God. God is not anybody's monopoly. But if you directly approach God, what do the priests do? What do the community do? What do the church do? What do the temples do? So you come to me and I am the mediator between you and God. So this is a commercialization of religion, which is the fundamental negative aspect of anything which you want to hold and possess and have a following.
Thank you, Swamiji. I feel like a television anchor to say my time is running out. It has been a very stimulating conversation, but some last words from you, John, and Rizwan Bhai, and then if people are still interested, some questions.
Yeah. You know, my last words would be to recall what His Holiness the Dalai Lama said at another meeting where I was present and he was chairing the panel. He said, a seventh of the world doesn't believe in religion. They're also searching for the truth. They're also searching for peace. They've realized much of the truths that we have spoken. And therefore I come back to the point I was trying to make about the dialogue of life. 1.25 billion of us live in this land, which can be full of strife. But at the grassroots, it is not full of strife. I travel the breadth and length of this country many times a year. At the grassroots, still an evil wind blows. There is peace, there is tranquility. The cow is safe, the land grows wheat, the weathers come and change. And I think in that microcosm of a small village or a sub-area, you find peace because they're reconciled, they let their neighbor be. They're not out to disturb his life. They live in peace. Sometimes they intermarry, sometimes they don't. At the Cherry, which in Tamil Nadu, Andhra, even in Kerala, is on the borders of the village where all the Dalits live. The Dalit, the Muslim, the Christian, the other outcasts, they live in a sense of tranquility. And that is unique. They're all outcasts from a larger system. And they, among themselves, in their outcastness, live in peace. I find that very intriguing. They are out of control of the pastors and the priests and the monks, if I may say so, pulling your leg. They're out of control, and they are at peace. And I think that is the peace towards which all of us mention. And I must say, although the hall is half empty or half full, as you would make out, in the glare of the light, ultimately it becomes a discourse within people. We don't bother about the audience. We're talking soul to soul, person to person. And that is taking place at the grassroots a zillion times over. I think this opportunity to express our lived experience, I am grateful for that.
Rizwan Bhai.
जैसे इस्लामिक जो मान्यता है कि जो कुरान है वो अल्लाह की किताब है, मतलब प्रॉफिट ने नहीं लिखा है, वो उसका गॉड अल्लाह ने अपने फरिश्ते के ज़रिए वो दुनिया में भेजा। तो अब उसमें जो पहला शब्द या पहला लफ्ज़ जो आया वो है इक़रा, मीन्स पढ़ो। तो जैसे स्वामी जी ने भी बताया कि जो बीच के जो गॉड और पब्लिक जो आदमी, उसके बीच की जो कड़ी बनने के बाद जो ये गड़बड़ी आ जाती है, जैसे मौलवी आ जाए बीच में या मंदिर या चर्च, तो ये सेम चीज़ ये भी कुरान भी यही कहता है कि आपको उसके लिए ये नहीं कहा कि जाके किसी से पढ़ो, बोला कि नहीं पढ़ो, मतलब आप जो एक सच है, कह लीजिए ट्रूथ या बिलीव, उसको आप खुद से, मतलब आप इंडिविजुअल को ये कुरान क्या करता है, आपको एक जगा रहा है कि नहीं आप जाइए खुद से देखिए, उसको तलाश कीजिए। दूसरी जैसे शेषाद्रिचार्य जी ने बताया कि ऊपर तो ठीक है, वो नीचे जब आता है पब्लिक में तो आते आते डाइल्यूट हो जाता है, ये भी सही। तो जैसा मैंने अभी अपने पिछले बारे में बताया कि जैसे वो कैसे टीचिंग्स कुछ और है, जब वो नीचे आता है तो असल में होता क्या है कि वो पूरे समग्रता में देखने के बजाय आदमी उसमें अपने सुविधा अनुसार उसमें से कुछ चीज़ें को लेके और उस पे उसको आगे बढ़ाता है। अब जैसे बड़ा अभी वो एक कुख्यात वर्ड हो गया, मैं उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा मैं जैसे जिहाद, प्रॉफिट ने क्या कहा, उन्होंने से पूछा कि जिहाद क्या है, तो उन्होंने कहा कि जिहाद जो वर्ड है वो आया है जद्दोजहद, मतलब कोशिश, ट्राई। और जिहाद क्या है, जैसा अभी शेषाद्रिचार्य जी ने भी बताया कि वो अंदर का जो इबलीस है, तो वो कहा गया है कि पहला जो आपकी जो कामयाबी है, सफलता है, वो आपके अंदर के जो ईगो है, ईगो या जो बुराई है, तो उसको मारना है, ये जिहाद है। फिर लोगों ने कहा नहीं और बड़ा बताइए, और सबसे बड़ा जिहाद क्या होगा, तो उन्होंने कहा कि टू स्पीक ट्रूथ इन फ्रंट ऑफ ए क्रूअल योर लीडर या शासक, मतलब अपने बादशाह के सामने जो अनैतिक है उसके सामने सच बोलना। अब वो देखिए कहाँ चला गया। मैं इसको थोड़ा सा और इस पे बता के कि जवाहरलाल नेहरू जी कलेक्टेड वर्क्स हैं, उनमें उन्होंने उसमें क्रूसेड को डिफाइन किया है कि जो धर्म युद्ध इस्लाम और क्रिश्चियनिटी के बीच में हुआ वो कैसे शुरुआत हुई। 4-5 पेज में उन्होंने लिखा है, मैं 2-3 लाइन में आपको बताता हूँ, अगर समय मिले तो थोड़ा पढ़, हम लोग आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है, बाकी ज़्यादातर लोग पढ़े भी होंगे, कि उन्होंने ये बताया कि उस वक्त 2 चर्च के क्रिश्चियनिटी के 2 ध्रुव थे, एक कुस्तुंतनिया इस्तांबुल और दूसरा रोम। तो जो कुस्तुंतनिया वाले थे वो अपने आप को ज़्यादा सुपीरियर समझते थे रोमन लोगों से, और उस वक्त इस्लाम जो था वो एक सुपर पावर, मतलब पॉलिटिकल पावर उस रीजन में था। तो कुस्तुंतनिया वाले ने सोचा कि यही है कि इनके साथ मिलके, रोमन वाले ने देखा, चूँकि कुस्तुंतनिया वाले रोमन को नीचा समझते थे, कि क्यों नहीं इनसे मिलके और हम लोग कुस्तुंतनिया वाले जो अपने को सुपर समझते हैं उनसे वो बदला लिया जाए। तो वो इस्लामिक पावर से मिल गए। उसके बाद वो बिजनेस वेनिस में और जिनेवा में व्यापारी लोग रहते थे, तो जब इस्लामिक सुपर पावर आया तो वो टैक्सेशन शुरू कर दिया, टैक्स लगा दिया, तो अब बिजनेस का प्रॉफिट कम हो गया। तो अब इन दोनों ने भी सोचा कि भाई अब, और जो क्रिश्चियन पावर था वो अभी बहुत कमज़ोर था, तो अब किसी के बिजनेस के इंटरेस्ट के लिए अब मैं क्यों जाऊंगा लड़ने, जब तक अगर मुझे भी कोई टारगेट, इनको कहा कि नहीं, ये इस्लाम को डिफीट करना है, ये क्रिश्चियनिटी का और इस्लाम के बीच का जंग है। तो उस तरह से जो छोटे छोटे पावर थे क्रिश्चियंस को, उन्होंने यूनाइट किया इस्लाम के से लड़ने के लिए। तीसरा एक कारण और भी उन्होंने कहा कि फ्रांस के और जर्मनी के बच्चों को उन्होंने जिहाद में, धर्म युद्ध के लिए जो क्रिश्चियन थे उसमें यूनाइट किया। अब देखिए, यूनाइट किया इस्लाम के ख़िलाफ़ लड़ने के लिए, और वही क्रिश्चियन जो बच्चे थे, टीनेजर थे जर्मनी के और फ्रांस के, उनको ले जाके मिस्र में जो मुसलमान बादशाह था उसको वो बेच दिए, उसका दास बना दिए। तो आगे फिर उसमें जवाहरलाल नेहरू जी लिखते हैं कि जो हमेशा से जैसा रहा है हुकूमत का कि सच को जो चीज़ होती है वो बयान वो आम आदमी से नहीं करते हैं, वो उसको अपने सुविधा अनुसार सच को बताते हैं। तो मैं यही कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि आप कभी भी किसी भी धर्म को, चाहे वो हिंदुइज़्म हो या हो, हाँ, उनका जो प्रैक्टिस करने का, फॉलो करने का, कोई नमाज़ पढ़ता है, शेषाद्रिचार्य, बिल्कुल वो अलग हो सकता है, लेकिन जो सच्चाई है, को एग्जिस्टेंस है, वो सब में बराबर है। उसका तरीका ज़रूर अलग हो सकता है और उसको मानने का, उसको प्रे करने का, लेकिन सच्चाई की तरफ कमोबेश सब एक ही जगह ले जाते हैं।
Thank you, Rizwan bhai. Few final comments from you as time runs out.
नहीं, इट्स वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. इनफैक्ट जैसे शुक ब्रह्म के संदर्भ में कहा जाता है वादे वादे जाए थे तत्वबोधा. तो जब हम चर्चा करते हैं वाद, आजकल का जो जॉन इज ए विक्टिम ऑफ दिस टेलीविजन डिबेट्स. आजकल मैं थोड़ा दूर हूँ उससे, थैंकफुली. बट इट्स नॉट द टेलीविजन डिबेट, बट जिस तरीके का चर्चाएं होती हैं तो वो वाद होता है. सो वादे वादे जायते तत्वबोधा. तत्व को समझना, तत्व इज द एसेंस ऑफ एनीथिंग. उसको समझने के लिए भी डिस्कशंस और डिबेट की आवश्यकता है. परंतु ये जो एसेंस का जो रियलाइजेशन है वो सामूहिक नहीं होता है. कहीं भी थियोलॉजिकली ऑल्सो, अगर आप इस्लाम की थियोलॉजी को देखेंगे, आज की जो स्ट्रक्चर जिसके बारे में आपने उल्लेख किया, डोंट गो विद द स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ इट, डोंट गो विद द स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द चर्च, डोंट गो विद द स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ हिंदू. ये जो स्ट्रक्चर को आप देखेंगे तो गलत हो जाएगा. स्ट्रक्चर के पीछे जो द स्पिरिट, एज जीसस सेड, गो विद द स्पिरिट ऑफ द लेटर वर्ड, नॉट बाय द लेटर ऑफ द वर्ड. उसमें अगर जाएंगे तो ध्यान में आएगा कि ये जो सामूहिक स्पिरिचुअलिटी है वो किसी भी थियोलॉजी में नहीं कहा गया है. और दूसरा, ये जो पीसफुल को एग्जिस्टेंस आजकल शब्द प्रयोग है बड़ा, वॉट एवर इट मीन्स, उसको एक्सप्लेन करना बड़ा मुश्किल है. बट लेट अस अंडरस्टैंड इट बाय व्हाट जनरली इट इज़ अंडरस्टूड एज. वो पीसफुल को एग्जिस्टेंस की जो बात है, उसका जो आधार है, बेसिस है, वो स्टेट नहीं है. एक बड़ा अच्छा गवर्नमेंट होगा तो देयर विल बी पीसफुल एग्जिस्टेंस, नहीं है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन भी नहीं है. Pardon my saying this, it's very important. Constitution of India is very important, but Constitution of India will not guarantee peaceful coexistence. और ये none other than Baba Saheb Ambedkar himself has said, however good the Constitution may be, if the people implementing it are bad, the result will be bad. However bad the Constitution may be, if the people are good, there is nothing wrong with it. ये है, इसीलिए we are all we are peacefully coexist not because of the state, not because of the king. न राज्यम न राजासीत न दंडो न च दांडी कहा. Even the threat of punishment, न दंडो न च दांडी कहा. If you don't peacefully coexist, I will punish you. Even that does not guarantee peaceful coexistence. इसीलिए कहते हैं धर्मेणैव प्रजा सर्वा रक्षन्ति स्म परस्परम. I have to protect him, he has to protect me. We have to protect one another. धर्मेणैव, धर्म के आधार पर सर्वेषाम अविरोधेन, इस प्रकार का विचार लेकर एक टॉलरेंस इज ए रॉन्ग वर्ड, रेस्पेक्ट. I respect your views. I am not tolerating your views. I respect your views. So when I respect your views and I protect you, तो ये धर्म के आधार पर, धर्म मतलब रिलीजन नहीं है. ये जब कहा गया तब क्रिश्चियनिटी इस्लाम तो था ही नहीं, तो धर्म शब्द का उपयोग तब भी किया गया. इसलिए धारणा धर्म मिथ्याहु धर्मो धारयति या प्रजा. तो जिसको दैट विच कैन होल्ड थिंग्स टुगेदर इज धर्म, एंड दैट इज द ट्रूथ. तो ये बहुत बड़ा विषय है. आपने बहुत गंभीर विषय को ले लिया है. इस विषय का विवेचन करने की जो क्षमता है वो ऐसे लोगों में है, इन लोगों में है जो पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं. इसीलिए आई एम लिमिटिंग माई सेल्फ ओनली टू माई ऑब्जर्वेशंस. थैंक यू.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say that this has been a very, in the context of what John has said and all of you, I have to thank you for the fraternity, and I think that the engagement from our hearts and convictions and feelings on a very important subject, and maybe we have even just only scratched the surface of something which is very deep and complex. I'm assured that this conversation if I may call it that, has been recorded. It'll go on YouTube. It'll be transcribed and published. So hopefully it'll go beyond the confines of this audience. And thank you all for being extremely patient and attentive for a long evening. And if I, it's sharp 8 o'clock, which was my deadline. But I know that the panel has traveled long distances, and so if there is a question or two, we will respond to that. So I see one hand up, 2, 3. So we'll just do 3 questions, and then we'll call it the end of a long day. So we can, if there is a microphone, or just stand up and speak, and we'll hear you.
My question is to Swamiji.
Yes, I'm ready.
Having studied in Christian missionary schools for almost 12 years of my life, I happened to spend 3 years at a Ramakrishna Mission school, Narendrapur, as a boarder. And I took my lessons from there. There's a specific question that I want to ask you in the context of Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Mission, in the context of what's happening in India today. A few decades ago, maybe in the 80s, I actually left Narendrapur Ramakrishna Mission the year you joined Ramakrishna Mission, 78. That's what I hear. In the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, Ramakrishna Mission once staked a claim that it wanted a separate denomination from Hinduism. It did not want to be called a Hindu. Ramakrishna Mission did not want to be called Hindus. There is deep philosophy in it. I personally understand where it comes from, but for the audience, could you explain why was it so, and why is being Hindu so important in the context of our Indic civilization?
So, should I go for that? See, that was in an entirely different context of having to run certain schools, certain college institutions. And in fact, Ramakrishna Mission did not say that they are not Hindus. They did say they are Hindus plus Christians plus Muslims plus Sikhs plus everything. And if by a Hindu you define a person who is a non-Christian, non-Muslim, non-Sikh and non-other religions, that kind of Hindu Ramakrishna Mission is not. This was the stand which Ramakrishna originally took. Unfortunately, as it happens in cases like this, as the case went on and on, then the lawyers, perhaps, I'm not very sure of that, said you can't say that. I say this or that. The whole problem about life itself, once again going philosophically, is that the human mind always thinks 0 or 1. The Boolean logic is something which a human mind cannot get rid of. And therefore the quantum physics, when it came in, they brought in the idea of fuzzy logic. Truth is not Boolean, either this or that. Truth is this and that and that and that. In Schrödinger, the famous wave mechanist, who was the father of wave mechanics, quantum mechanics, he said in the Nobel acceptance speech, in one sentence, what I have done is to replace the paradigm of either or by both and. Truth can be this as well as that. The human mind wants to put truth in this and not that. So the Ramakrishna Mission's claim was that following Sri Ramakrishna's experience, he practiced in Islam. When he practiced Islam, he was out and out Islam. He could not bear to see Hindu gods and goddesses. He could not worship images. And again he came back. So the idea was, based on his experience, could you think of Ramakrishna Mission itself as an entity which does not claim to be labeled Hindu of the traditional type? If that would confer on the Ramakrishna Mission, right according to the Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. That was what they tried, and it went on and on, it got distorted and so on. That's part of history. Can you remain a Hindu but still at the same time be Christian and Muslim and so on? That was the experiment. It is now unsolved. But that Ramakrishna did. Can you remain a Hindu, still be a Muslim, still be a Christian, still be a Sikh? Can a Muslim remain a Muslim but be everything else? Swami Vivekananda said, would I want a Christian to become a Hindu? God forbid. Would I want a Hindu to be converted to Christianity? God forbid. Would I want a Muslim to be converted to something else? God forbid. Each person will remain in his own fold with the roots deep. At the same time, embrace everything else in a loving, fraternal, as he said. Now, I'll end with Swamiji's quote. He said, "Is God's book ever finished?" It's a wonderful book. Quran, Bible, Vedas are but several pages which have been written in this book. An infinite number of pages are yet to be written.
And that provides a wonderful framework for harmony between faiths. One more, that's, sir.
Sir, thanks a lot. We had a very wonderful and enlightened discussion. And what I understand from this is there is a unanimous opinion among the panelists that at the highest level there is unanimity, at the lower level that's the problem. That's what I understand. I think I took it rightly. So in the contemporary Indian scenario, this is a basic problem. See, all the religious heads, as you rightly said, they're having unanimous opinion and no problem. But at the grassroots level, there exists some problem. So to overcome this, the religious leaders, how they should go about this? This is a practical problem we are facing in the present context. So if this is true, at the highest level, we have a unanimity in having all the religions are same. When it comes to the reality, the grassroots level, this is not getting reflected. And this is the main problem for the today's, whatever we are facing in Indian context.
Thank you, sir. We'll just take all the questions and then do one round of responses. So it'll be quicker. Sir.
Hi, my question is for anyone on the dais. Riaz spoke of the hermeneutical principle of ijtihad, which is reinterpretation in Islam tradition. So they have the idea of using reason to interpret their traditions. So what is the counterpart of that in Hinduism or Buddhism? I know there's the Mimamsa school of thought. So what principles do they have to make room for reason and critical thinking within Hinduism? Could anybody on the dais elaborate on this for me?
Thank you. Any other questions? Sir.
My question is to Sri Seshadri ji. We all have to merge to one identity to overcome all these crises. But how it will be possible in the present context?
Okay, so I'll just do a brief response to, from the Buddhist perspective and reason and logic. I think, the Buddha was very clear, and he asked when he was dying, he told his followers that, oh my followers, you must validate everything that I have said, because sometimes it will appear contradictory. Because when I'm speaking to different people, in order to help them understand, I'm speaking about a non-conceptual experience. So it will appear contradictory, and it may even be positioned differently, and it must stand to the scrutiny of reason, logic, and experience. And what he also said, and which is that it was an evolutionary religion, that the Buddha symbolized the human form that perhaps first articulated this. And so you have generations and numerous, Nagarjuna, Atisha, a whole spectrum of people, as has happened in Hinduism too, who subsequently elaborated, refined, offered perspectives. I mean, today every monk, every teacher from the Ramakrishna Mission, from numerous institutions, revitalized their faith by, and I think that was one of the points that came up earlier, that when a faith is frozen, and I think every speaker here has pointed to that, it needs to be dynamic, it needs to respond to contemporary predicaments and to contemporary knowledge. So one of the dangers, if it is frozen, then it no longer becomes relevant and loses its vitality. There was a specific question for Chari Sahib, and then if we could go around. Yes, please. Yes.
So I will add a line to that. The Hindu tradition, the Shraddharshanas clearly have laid down the pramanas, the jurisdiction of each text. Shankara talks about Shruti, Yukti and Anubhuti. You can endlessly argue, but don't argue in the air, in vacuum. It has to be based on certain Shruti text as scripture, just like in science. In science, you have to base yourself on the discovery of a particular scientist and then argue. And then it has to be validated by your own experience. And Shankara clearly says the Vedas are pramana, are proof only when no other pramana is available. And he boldly asserts, even if 1000 scriptural Vedic texts say that the ice is cold, ice is hot and the fire is cold, they should be respectfully rejected because Vedas are not pramana where sense pramana is available.
Yeah, 3 questions. In fact, I would also would like to take off where Swamiji left on the first question of identity within the Ramakrishna mission. As he very rightly said, that was a very specific court case. It's very well known as Calcutta court case, if you remember it, where under Article 29, minority institutions are allowed to run schools. Article 29 and 30 both, denomination and 30. So it was in that respect, some of these schools in Northeast were to be closed down because they were classified as Hindu schools. And Calcutta College also, yeah. So in that respect, a via media was found out by some of the advocates, over-enthusiastic advocates. And that was suggested. But then that is not to be confused with a larger identity crisis of Ramakrishna Mission. So that was the issue. There was, you pointed out about the higher level of teachers and the grassroots level. I think I didn't say grassroots level, I said the followers. So if you look at the whole story again, I think at the top level, at the philosophical level, and at the level of scholars and practitioners who have experienced all these things, there is no confusion. And at the grassroots level also there is no confusion. The confusion is in the middle. It is the middle class which is always the problem. So tomorrow's budget you will see how middle class is being treated and how middle class treats the government. So middle class is the problem, and it is this middle class which determines who is correct and who is wrong, or above them and below them. That is the problem comes up. So the grassroots is safe, there is no problem in it. As far as this issue which you raised, that was about of
In the present context, how do you reconcile this?
Seshadri sir, as a parent, how one can imbibe these values to their child, basically. That is the whole perspective what is coming out from this session.
it is no doubt a challenge, as Rajiv very rightly pointed out. The challenge is huge, no doubt about it. I think if you expect one particular agency or a particular team to do it, it will be very difficult. But then if this inculcation goes, a multi-pronged inculcation starts from every aspect of it. And then every such, I won't say religion, again the religion word is a very wrong word. It's a misunderstood word. But the faith stream, if you may call so, there has to be a internal churning in it. Fortunately for Hinduism, those who follow Hindu scriptures and texts, there have been a huge amount of churning in this, and it is going on even now. And similarly, there are other areas also where these things have gone. And then once this churning takes place, and then we are able to relate to what we call the Yuga Dharma. There has to be a different model for an eternal value model for changing society. Society is ever changing. So we have to have eternal values for a changing society. सतत परिवर्तनशील समाज के लिए शाश्वत मूल्यों पर आधारित व्यवस्था. Eternal values for a changing society. That is the setup that we will have to think of.
Okay, just a few sentences. I can see an exhausted audience now, but it's important to wind it up.
Let me wind it up for all of you by leaving you with a disturbing thought. I quoted His Holiness the Dalai Lama by saying a seventh of the world is atheistic. I leave you with the other thought that there is still people in the world who haven't heard of any of the religions we represent here. Deep in Africa, Latin America, Polynesia, before he mentioned that there was Dharma before Christ and the Holy Prophet were born, certainly. And there were areas in the world which lived in coexistence and lived a spiritual life without having heard of any of us and of our faiths. Thank you and good night.
जैसे अभी दो लोगों ने पूछा कि इसको कैसे एक तो ग्रास रूट जो आपने कहा और एक ये क्वेश्चन इसमें ज़रूरी है कि जो धर्मों का अध्ययन है ना वो अपने धर्म के जैसे अगर कोई मुसलमान फेथ का है तो ज़रूरी नहीं कि कुरान और हदीस ये पढ़ा है उसको गीता भी पढ़नी चाहिए वेद भी बाइबल भी. उससे क्या होगा फिर आपका जो नज़रिया है आपका जो देखने का कैनवास है वो बड़ा होगा तब उसके बाद सच्चाई निकल के आएगी. नहीं तो फिर आप एक सिर्फ फॉलोअर बन के रह जाएंगे. कोई आप आध्यात्मिक जो एक यात्रा है वो आपकी पूरी नहीं हो पाएगी. तो इससे क्या हो इसी से आप जो बच्चे का चाहते हैं कि कैसे वो मतलब उसकी ट्रेनिंग की जाए और इसके लिए मैं एक जिगर मुरादाबादी एक उर्दू के शायर हैं उनके लिए मैं एक लाइन उनकी दो शेर आपको सुना देता हूँ कि जो ज़रा सी पी के बहक गया उसे मैं कदे से निकाल दो. जो ज़रा सी पी के बहक गया उसे मैं कदे से निकाल दो. यहाँ तंग नज़र का गुजर नहीं यहाँ अहले ज़र्फ़ का काम है. अब थोड़ा सा कुछ जाने नहीं है उसके बाद अब दो तीन वर्ड जैसे तंग मतलब नैरो की ज़रूरत नहीं है जिसका वाइड रेंज है वो. थैंक यू.